What if I told you that the AI tool your HR team just implemented could land you in a discrimination lawsuit tomorrow? And the scariest part? You probably can't even explain how it makes decisions about people's careers. I'm Ryan Kohler, and this is The Future of Work with AI. Emily Alvarez sat down again with David S. Cohen, author of Selecting the Best and founder of DS Cohen and Associates, for part two of a conversation that's going to save you from becoming the next cautionary tale in AI ethics disasters. Here's what's terrifying. David just revealed something that should make every HR leader pause before clicking deploy on that shiny new AI recruiting tool. He was on an HR.com webinar where a presenter was showing off ChatGPT 4.0 for resume screening. David asked the obvious question, what happens when candidates just stuff keywords into their resumes to game the system? The presenter's response, David, you're absolutely right. That's the shortcoming. But here's the kicker. They're selling it anyway. And companies are buying it without understanding how it works, what it can't do, or how to explain its decisions to the people whose careers it's affecting. Emily and David dive deep into the ethics crisis that's brewing in AI-powered HR. Why transparency isn't just nice to have, it's the difference between innovation and discrimination. Why most HR practitioners using AI can't explain the algorithms they're deploying on human lives. And why the rush to be first mentality is creating a California gold rush scenario where everyone's trampling over each other to get to AI gold that might not even exist. This isn't about being anti-AI. This is about being pro-human in how we implement AI. Because when you're making decisions about people's livelihoods, careers, and futures, I don't know how the algorithm works isn't an acceptable answer. Ready to discover why ethical AI implementation might be the most important conversation your organization isn't having? Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome back to another episode of The Future of Work with AI. I'm joined again today with our friend David S. Cohen. Thanks for joining us, David. He is the
Glad to
author.
be here.
Yeah, he's the author of Selecting the Best. I just read it. Great book. Also, The Talent Edge, and he is the founder of DS Cohen and Associates. Super excited to talk about AI ethics today, which is a great topic. I think it's a timely topic considering all of the conversation about regulations surrounding AI, and especially in the workplace. We all kind of in the HR space know about what happened with Workday fairly recently. But I'm excited to get into the meat and, really dive into the topic. So thanks for being here, David, again. And um, happy and excited to talk about ethics. So, why don't we kick it off?
That's really great. I think it's a topic which it's got to be addressed, and it's not going to be addressed by government necessarily. And even if it's government gives it guidelines, it's the old adage that sometimes what legal is not ethical and what's ethical is not legal. And so therefore, you've each organization has to define for itself according to its own values, what is ethical, what's the parameter that define that they have integrity using it. And so I think it's a really important topic.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, as you said, it's fairly unregulated from like a governmental or federal standpoint right now. Obviously, um, you can't use it to break laws that are already in existence. So, you can't use it to deep fake. I think I read a story about like a board that was created in deep fake, and it was the CEO and like a number of his board members, and they extorted a bunch of money, like millions of dollars, from his banking institution, on a deep fake Zoom call. And
Wow.
yeah, like crazy stuff like that. So obviously, there's some things going on there, where, that type of stuff is you can't do that to break laws that are already in existence. But from within the workplace, coming from a background of applicant screening, hiring in HR, where where the rubber meets the road for me is when we talk about screening applicants and we talk about performance reviews and we talk about metrics and different things like that. information that we are potentially loading into AI and asking us to give it information about people, right? Um,
Right.
my question, I guess, is within an organization, how do we potentially get to the point where we have these conversations surrounding what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to put into AI? And I think it comes down to values, but I think it comes down to human, right? Um,
Well, everything is about humans because,
right,
I always say, when somebody said the program doesn't work, it's the computer's fault. Well, who programmed the computer?
right,
There's a person who programmed it, and the person who's programming it follow the regulations of the organization. So very much so that even before they start to create the algorithm that they're going to use, they have to set out what are the policies, what are the procedures, perhaps what are local laws, but more importantly, what are our values and what are our beliefs? And one of the big buzzwords of the last few years has been transparency.
right,
How transparent are organizations? Are they actually putting in ads that all resumes will be screened first by an AI system? I
right.
haven't seen too many of those,
I haven't
but
either.
yet they're doing it and they're not letting people know.
Right,
If they're doing interviews, are they saying that, you know, you have a choice between a bot interview or an in-person interview and give people a choice? Or are they just
right.
saying to everybody, you got to do this? And some people might be naive and not realize it's a bot interview.
Yeah,
Um, so it really goes back to the fundamentals of what do you believe in? And are you living that belief system in the way you set it up?
right,
Because if you don't, anybody can sell you a bill of goods and you'll buy into it. And that's one of my biggest issues is that with all these HRS systems, HRM systems, a lot of them now, like Workday, come with an AI,
hmm,
but that AI is not adjusted to your culture, to your values, to your local geography. And
right,
since it's not really going to work for you.
right. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's also up to organizations. And I think as early adopters, when we talk about transparency, I think, and I know with certain organizations, obviously you don't want to spill internal, secrets of what you're doing, from that perspective. But when it comes to AI as early adopters, I think it's important while we are still figuring out things about it or learning more about it every day because we are. I mean, I don't know that I believe anybody's an expert in generative AI. I don't know that I believe that anybody's an expert in AI, right? I think we're all learning. And that's kind of the cool thing about it. It's constant evolution of learning and the software, right? But the thing is, I think as early adopters, it would behoove us to be fairly transparent, not just about all the cool stuff we build in AI and how it works and how it's awesome and how we had successes with it, but I think also we should be sharing when things don't work and when things go wrong or when things are not um when we try something and it didn't work maybe exactly the way we want it to, and we had to make a change to it because, and maybe when it didn't work, why it didn't work, or what we did leading up to it that caused it not to work. Because that's part of it is learning from what it did and didn't do. And
Well,
so,
that's the whole open sourcing system, so to
right,
speak, that we share. It wasn't like Apple when it started, closely guarded its program and,
right,
it was impossible to break into it. But on the other hand, there was open sourcing and people learned from each other and
right,
continuously improved it. So if one organization has learned something and it's causing failure, caused
hmm,
stress, it would behoove them to make that public to say, hey, listen, this is what we discovered trying to do this. It caused us this issue.
right,
And therefore, we overcame it by doing this. Just be aware. It doesn't give any secrets away. It just
Right.
says, when you're building the algorithm, don't do this.
Yes,
Do
exactly.
this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, that means that organizations have to share information they might feel is going to give away, the secret sauce of what they're doing behind the scenes.
Right. And I don't even know that you would have to, well, I don't even know that you have to give away the whole recipe in some of these cases. But I mean, I think we can lead each other in the direction to figure some of this out from a conceptual or foundational level. You brought up an interesting point when we talked prior to this about education, right? And about HR practitioners, because we've talked in previous conversations or in our previous conversation about HR practitioners um, sort of being the catalyst to talking about adoption of tech
Mhm.
or AI in the workplace, right? They're kind of the influencer, so to speak, in the workplace, as far as being the bridge between employees and understanding the adoption and where it goes, but also being the educated one on what the system needs and what it doesn't need, or what maybe does need to be automated, what doesn't need to be automated. Talk a little bit about your experience and opinion on that.
My opinion is that I believe, first of all, AI, ChatGPT, and all this just started 2.5 years ago.
Right,
So you're absolutely right. We're all early. Anybody talking about it's an early adopter
right.
because they're still working out the bugs, and it's gone from 3 to 3.5 to 4, and it's expanded now way beyond that.
I think
So
they just came out with 5 today, actually. A soft
yeah,
launch.
I just saw
Yeah,
5 actually. Yeah,
yeah,
I just saw that on when I was using ChatGPT before.
yeah,
Um, so I think that first of all, if I am going to use it for my needs as an HR person, I have to understand it. And it's like a teacher who goes into a classroom unprepared.
right.
The students very quickly figure that out, and there's chaos, bedlam in the classroom.
Yeah.
However, if they're understand it and they can explain it, the students listen.
Hmm.
Here's what I mean by that. Transparency means to me that the HR practitioner needs to understand how that algorithm was derived and be able to explain it to anybody who says you're using this for performance management, for leadership development, for development planning, for selection, promotion, whatever it is, that I need to understand, the outcome was different than I expected, but maybe the outcome's right, but I will know it better if you can explain it to me on how it arrived at that outcome. And I would speculate that most HR people who are using it don't understand the algorithm, don't understand the parameters that were built into the search, and therefore they can't explain it. So it's sort of like, I don't know, it just came up that way.
Right,
And that's not going to, that's going to cause more frustration, and just say you're using an instrument that you don't know how to use, you're not using properly. And I think HR has to protect itself by making sure that everybody who's using it, who is instructing people on how to use it for HR purposes, can explain the philosophy behind it, the creation of it, what it can and cannot do, what are its limitations. And that transparency has to be upfront, because if it's not, then people are always going to have questions. And sometimes it's those questions that get us in trouble because we can't answer them. If we
right,
can answer them with confidence and certainty, then people will accept it. But right now, how many people actually know AI that well? And how many business HR leaders, uh, other than knowing that AI exists, know
right,
how that algorithm has been put together and what it can and cannot do?
right,
Obviously, the true test to me is you build that algorithm, you test it within your environment, And if they had tested it, Workday would not be having this problem. If they had run 100 resumes through it and said, wait a second, nobody under 30 and over 40
Yeah.
was selected, therefore we got a problem before we let this loose in the public.
Right.
But obviously they didn't do that because there's a rush to be first. There's a
Right.
rush to adoption.
Right.
And maybe we have to take a step back because this is a new technology and it's going to create a lot of ethical issues
Mhm.
on how we use it and how it influences people, how we're talking about human beings and their careers and their livelihoods.
Yes.
And we got to be careful about that.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's that's why it's human first. And it's these rushes to be first have sometimes very dire consequences, right? I would almost equate it to like an Oppenheimer situation, right? Where, you know, AI is a very powerful tool. Like it can be used for really great things, it can be used for really not great things, but um not destructive in that force in that same way. But I think we need to we need to take the time to do the learning and development up front.
Yeah, I
And
think you're right. And it is powerful.
yeah.
And as some cartoon character once said, with great power comes great responsibility. And,
Yep.
and we're not taking the responsibility seriously enough. The image, when you were saying that, the image that came to my mind was the California gold rush.
Yeah.
There's gold in California. Everybody trampled over each other to try to get there. And by the
Yeah.
time they got there, there was no gold.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
are we trampling over each other to be the early adopter, saying that we're using it, we're ahead of the game, only to
Yeah.
find out we've used it all wrong and nobody's using it anymore?
Right. Yeah.
That's an
And
extreme, but
yeah, I mean, it is, it's an extreme example, but I think when you equate it to that we're talking about human lives, it's not that extreme. I mean, this is again, people's livelihoods. People are a lot of times defined to an extent by their jobs and what they do. I mean, I know for me, I have a lot of pride about what I do for a living. I have take pride in my craft, and um when that gets, threatened in some way, it's not pretty,
no,
um
it's not. It's distressing people. See,
yeah.
there's a domino effect here. People
Sure.
stress out, they lose sleep, productivity goes down, they get sick, they leave work, productivity goes further down. I
Right.
mean,
And
this
then their
emotional
families,
impact,
collateral damage. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be
So,
collateral damage if
right.
it's done wrong.
Yeah. So it's a way bigger conversation, and that's why the ethics behind it are so important to talk about and I think iron out now. And when, or at least to the extent, but I also think when we say as HR practitioners, answering these questions, and I think it's also okay and it's human to say that, you know what, we are early adopters of this. Let's bring in some lower lift ways to introduce AI, um, explain the why behind it and why we're doing it. But I also believe that teams need to not be siloed in these conversations and need to be brought into open dialogue about these conversations and um, ask the questions. What are some things about your job that you feel lead to burnout? What are some tasks or things that you feel are tedious, are and bring them into that dialogue, because um to your point, to rush into an adoption of something big is incredibly stressful. And if we don't know that much about it, and then to try to rush into a huge adoption of something and cause that stress, and then to say, like, we don't know that much about it, is going to not be a very pleasant experience for companies.
Yeah,
Giving them a, yeah,
if
but
you
if,
don't know that much about it, why are you using it?
right. And then, but if we bring in lower lift options that we do kind of know some answers to, But as we're going through and we maybe don't know some answers, but they're easily researched, it's okay to say, I don't know right now, but I'm
Yeah,
looking
see,
into it.
yeah, I think that here's an example. You can use ChatGPT and program it to explain to a potential candidate what your company's about.
Right.
So you can set it up so it can answer in the moment questions.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what you could say is anybody sends in a resume, if you're interested, we have this chat GPT bot that will answer your questions. Here's how you log on. And
Sure.
afterwards, let us know if you're still interested in pursuing, being considered for a candidate.
Right.
Because they might find out after they know about the company, they're not interested. So
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
one way to use it.
Yeah.
Anything that's fact-based early on. So what's fact-based? Onboarding.
Yes.
Onboarding
Yep.
is shares information, shares policies, procedures. It shares about, how to handle your insurance or vacation time. The onboarding has about integration into the values of the company, examples of values of the company,
Right.
when they're lived, how they're celebrated. There's a lot of good things that happen during a long period of onboarding, which takes time. And it could help a long time because let's say that one of the things on onboarding is to have a discussion in the first day or two between the manager and the new employee about the orientation to the goals, the business, etc. It
Right.
can be documented that it happened or didn't happen, and then it can trigger some signal somewhere in HR to call the manager and say, wait a second, we got this new person on board. You haven't talked to them after the first day.
Right.
That means this person's now thinking of leaving. Therefore, you got to talk to them because it's
Yeah.
your fault. So
Yeah.
it's got a lot of really good opportunity to take a lot of, instead of having to remember to call the new manager on the first day and all this other stuff, it could expedite very smoothly a lot of these automated processes that do have a black and white answer.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly okay, but you got to tell people you're going to be doing it
I
and
agree.
they got to learn how to use it. But it's still, that can happen. And once people are comfortable with that, they realize it's been beneficial, then you can start to expand it. But,
Yes.
for now, one of the oldest uses of this that's been around for a long time now is applicant tracking systems. But
Yep.
applicant tracking systems still need human oversight because applicant tracking systems, besides age discrimination, where they're all male applicants or female applicants, and therefore ask all these intelligent questions on how do we get past this, the applicant tracking system, the the chat still cannot pick up on the nuance that's involved in what people might say about how they did certain things, the
Right.
behaviors that are critical to being successful in the organization. That's still not going to be captured. And therefore, we've run the risk of hiring a lot of people that have the skill, knowledge, education, and experience to do the job but can't be successful at the job because they cannot integrate behaviorally into the job.
Correct.
So, and we are missing a lot of good applicants who might not have all the skill and knowledge necessary, but could attain it fairly quickly with help,
Right.
but have all the right behaviors and will be superstars in the organization with that support, but you're not seeing them because you're only tracking skill and knowledge and experience. You're
I
not
agree.
tracking the important stuff yet.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm always concerned about is the gamesmanship, so to speak, that, okay, this job posting said, here's the things that need to be considered for the job. I just put them in my resume and hope they get picked up. And therefore I'm called in for an interview, whether I'm qualified or not. And so there's going to be a lot of people that do get identified or shortlisted using this stuff that don't don't belong. And that's why I say that this process is not going to replace recruiters.
No.
It is only going to enhance those who use it because before they even present a long list to the hiring manager, they need to review both the applicants that were recommended and some of the applicants who were rejected to see if the rejected pile actually has better candidates. So it might shorten the amount of resumes if you get 500 of them. It might narrow it down to 50,
Right.
but instead of spending 1.5 minutes, most recruiters tell me if they spend 30 seconds on a resume, they spend a lot of time.
Right.
So this process might say instead of 500, which you spend 30 seconds on, it'll narrow it down to 40 or 30, plus the fact another 30 or 40 that have been rejected. And I can actually spend 2 or 3 minutes looking at resumes and
Right.
finding a long list that really fits the hiring manager's needs.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. And I mean, coming from that ATS applicant tracking system world, I agree with you. Have spent hundreds of hours looking at resumes and screening applicants and doing this exact process that you're talking about. And within Applicant Pro, we had certain mechanisms in place for AI and, candidate matching based on keyword sorting and, stuff in there. Sort of an earlier AI adoption tool that was integrated into the system and stuff. But I believe you're right. I think that recruiters will still have to screen applicants, and I agree that there a lot of times are, diamonds in those screened out applicants because they do possess skills that could be fostered, right? Or that could be reskilled or skilled up depending. Um which is why I believe strongly in culture-based recruiting, um, and writing job ads that are more focused on attracting applicants based on culture and, pulling them in based on who they are as a person. Because when I sit in an interview with someone, I don't really care necessarily that they have an education in, from Harvard or that they, um, have 30 years of experience. Sometimes that can be a detriment, right? I mean, it can, depending
Oh
on the
yeah,
position. And
I
so when I meet somebody, a lot of times their education and their experience or whatever it is has nothing to do with it. It
I
might be,
agree.
yeah,
One of the things I teach in the workshop on interviewing, I have a 2 day or 1 day workshop on how to conduct a proper behavioral interview. And one of the things that I talk about is, would you rather hire somebody that might have 2 or 3 years of experience and the wisdom of 10 years,
hmm
or you have somebody that has 10 years experience on the resume and the
right,
wisdom and knowledge of 2 years experience?
right,
You know, for that
yeah,
person, it's Groundhog Day each year. They come to work and
yeah,
repeat, rinse and return, and they've learned nothing over 10 years. But
right,
then you get these managers, hiring managers, that insist on having years of experience. And there's two things I believe that we should stop looking at. We should stop looking at years of experience, and we should stop looking at education, because if, unless the education, like an engineering degree, which you have to sign off on documents,
yeah,
so
yeah,
you
yeah,
need the engineering degree,
right,
medical degree, the pilot's
yes,
license,
that's
obviously you need
different,
that.
right,
So you need to identify that. But do you really need, for a salesperson? I mean, here's an example. I did work with a company, a pharmaceutical company that was putting out a new product, and they needed 100 new salespeople.
yeah,
And traditionally in pharma, salespeople come from experienced people. They knew they couldn't get that many experienced people. And I said,
right,
why do you need experienced people? Hire new college grads who are enthusiastic about what you're doing and the
right,
chemistry, et cetera. Educate them and send them out.
yeah,
And they hired 100 grads.
yeah,
And 3 years later, all 100 were still working there because they hired them according to the behaviors, the values of the work
right,
they were doing. And they took 6 weeks of orientation to the job to teach them everything they need to know about the chemistry of this drug.
Right.
And they became experts on that drug through education, which they can learn or
Right.
ask questions about, but they couldn't in 6 weeks change their behavior. And it was the
Right.
behavior that made them successful. In
Right.
fact, in some regions, they had 95% share of the market. And that was amazing. It
Yeah.
was absolutely amazing. So you're absolutely right. Will AI capture this stuff? Not yet,
No.
if ever.
Yeah, and I mean that's when what you're talking about with like the pharmaceutical company and this type of hiring is we're actually turning what would traditionally be deemed as an expense into an asset, right?
Oh, absolutely.
By doing that on the front end and just taking that time with the learning and development on the front end, that is now an asset, right? Because you
Right.
have retention of employees that have stayed on 100 employees for a year that are still living the trajectory of the values and the product and all of that. And
So,
that's something that AI, you're right, cannot do. And I think it's, I don't know that we are maybe ever going to see it replace that. I mean, I kind of hope we don't personally ever see it replace that.
well, the presentation I originally made on the subject, was subtitled "Putting the Human Back in Human Resources."
Right. I remember. Yeah.
And and what I really believe after researching this and talking to many people about the concept of AI and how it's being used in its development and its whole process is that again, human beings have to look at it because it's only giving you based on a template. It's not giving you the depth.
Hmm.
It's like if I write a letter and I say to ChatGPT, write this email for me, and I
Right.
give it all the information it needs, it still gets it wrong. It
Right.
might write it as if I'm writing it to myself,
Yeah.
or somebody's writing it to me, and it's not worded correctly, or it's it's got all sorts of issues that if I just copy and paste it, the person I'm sending it to is going to think that, I was out to lunch.
Yeah.
And so you've got, even now, with all that sophistication and advancement in writing, it's still going to cause, it still has to be reviewed by human beings. So, how much the more so if you're using this for human resources activities? Is it going to screen people according to your value set? Is it going to screen people according to your policies and procedures? Is it going to be something which that you've tested internally in your company for 2, 3 months on performance management with a small group, or on leadership development, or development of development plans using it for 360? And you're going to see that it's continuously needs tweaking. One
Yeah.
organization I know in performance management, they were using AI, and it came back complaints from employees that when they compare notes, it seemed like everybody had the same wording on what the performance review said. There was
Ugh,
no differentiation because
I
the
think you told me that.
program
Yeah.
is going to repeat the same concepts, not
Right.
necessarily the same words, but the
Right.
same concept over and over again. So managers didn't review it. They
Yeah.
just cut and pasted it, sent it out there, and people looked at it and said, wait a second, I got the same review as my friend here,
Right.
and two of us really act differently on the job.
It's
So
very
what's going on?
damaging. Yeah.
So you got to test it. Part of the whole ethical part of this is if it's not tested to your specific organization beforehand, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I know that in my research, I saw that Johnson and Johnson tested theirs for, it took them 2.5 years to get it basically from the beginning to where it is now.
Right. And it's
And,
probably still not done.
and it's an evolutionary process
Yeah.
for them. So, it's, but people are jumping in it. They're buying the HRIS system. It's got AI on it. I'm going for it. and it ain't working that way.
Right. Well, and I would think too, a lot of it would depend on the internal structure of how your your company is set up in the terms of like hierarchy too, right? So like some companies traditionally have like a ladder succession, right? Where it's like manager either gets promoted or they retire or they, move elsewhere or they something, right? And then the next person gets bumped up in line because of seniority or tenure or whatever the case may be. Then some companies don't function like that at all. Some companies hire from outside, or some companies, like put an open internal job application out there for people to apply for. I mean, whatever the company is structured like. So I would almost think that it would matter how you're hiring too. If your goal is to hire somebody based on experience and based on education and based on whatever, then that would change the trajectory of how you're formulating your hiring process too. Um, but again, you would have to be very careful from a discrimination standpoint, that you're not roping in certain, again, back to the testing. You have to be careful with that kind of stuff because you and I both know that some ways of wording things, some ways of using certain adjectives, certain pronouns and nouns and certain things have, and especially in other languages, we know this to be true,
Oh, God, yes. But the
right?
problem is here is that people don't understand the power of semantics.
Right.
And what a word means to you might not be what a word means to me, even
Right. And
in
that's another
English.
problem. Right.
Even in English. So
Right.
you've got to be able to say, given the example you're using, if an organization says we've always promoted in a hierarchy up the ladder.
Yeah.
Now we want to do a cross-functional, put people where they really belong, give them opportunity for growth, do all these idealistic, wonderful things.
Yeah.
And we say to the AI, we're looking for a person with this experience, with this kind of performance review, with this, and this,
Yeah.
and we'll take it from anywhere in the organization. But are we still finding the right people? And are we still opening up a Pandora's box by changing a process which historically has been in place, and all of a sudden, without transparency, without telling
Right.
anybody, we've
I
just
know.
you know, opened it up to a true succession planning process,
Right.
and not this hierarchical siloed process anymore. Well,
Right.
you've got to educate people on that before you do it.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is like this AI changes, it could potentially change the culture and vice versa, right? The culture could change based on the AI. I mean, it really like it lends to thinking, and I keep going back to this, it lends to rethinking and reframing the way we think about work as a whole in
It
a lot of
does,
ways.
but I want to correct you on one point.
Yeah.
I don't think it will change the culture from my point of view, because the culture is rooted in a set of values.
Okay.
And
Yeah. That is true. Yeah.
those
I
values will
accept that.
not
Yeah.
change. They will
You're right.
evolve. So
Yeah.
it might cause them to evolve. That's going to be a couple of years.
Yes.
But what it'll do, it'll change the way we implement things. It'll
Yes.
change our
Correct.
strategy. But
Yes.
because the values are so strong in an organization, and because they do define right from wrong, our ethical code
Right.
of conduct, so to speak, we have to say, if we do this in AI, will it cause our people to perceive that we violated one of our values?
Right.
Will AI be this new procedure of opening up the entire community to succession planning, regardless of what silo they're in, will that be consistent with our value set, which has always been patriotic, oh, you know what I mean? Uh,
Patriarchal.
and hierarchical and structured, and all of a sudden we have this jungle gym apparatus,
Yeah.
which is going to confuse everybody.
Right,
So,
right.
you know, well, our values say that transparency is important, openness, honesty. Well, that's what we're moving towards. Maybe we haven't been living it, but we got to educate people we're moving towards it within the context of our values.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I agree.
that's going to make it strong.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Well, ethics and AI. I think we have a lot to think about as a as HR practitioners, as companies, as consultants. I think there's a lot. This begs further discussion. I mean, it's really going to evolve and keep going as we find out more about AI and more about how companies are interacting with it and implementing it and not implementing it, um, with transparency, without transparency. I think stuff will start, more stuff will come out, whether it's up to, people's decision or not. It'll come out one way or the other in the wash. But it's exciting times, I think. And it'll be interesting. I keep wondering when the government's going to get their hands on it is kind of my next question.
Well, according to what the current government says,
Yeah,
they're going along with the big tech companies and
right.
saying nobody's going to regulate AI. It's the Wild West.
Right.
It's from
Right.
the entrepreneurial Wild West that this is going to evolve. So
Right.
it's a free for all. However, Europe is not looking at it that way. And Europe
I
is
know.
putting in certain guardrails, especially using it for inside of corporations for the HR type of activities.
Right.
New York City has certain regulations already.
Yeah.
So I think that we can learn from both. What's the good of having it an open playing field? And what's the good for having government oversight?
Right.
And take the best of both worlds and sort of blend them
I
together.
agree. Yeah.
But this thing is evolving so fast. Will it, sort of be too late by the time we realize that?
Don't know. It's another one of those questions. We'll have to wait and see. So
Yeah, it
awesome.
is
Well,
happening.
yeah, it is in real time. It's happening. So, well, thank you again so much, David,
Thanks for
for
inviting me
being a
again.
guest. Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And can't wait for the next conversation. So thanks again and have a great rest of your day. David S. Cohen, you can pick up his book on Amazon, Selecting the Best, The Talent Edge, and DS Cohen and Associates. And your website, David, tell us your website real quick.
Is sagltd.com.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks again, David. And until next time.
Good. Thank you. Enjoy
Thanks.
your evening. Day.
You too.
Bye.
David and Emily just delivered the wake-up call every HR leader needs to hear. And if you're implementing AI without understanding how it works or being transparent about its limitations, you're not innovating. You're gambling with people's careers. Here are the 3 biggest takeaways. First, if you can't explain how your AI algorithm works, you shouldn't be using it for human decisions. Period. Transparency means HR practitioners must understand and be able to explain the philosophy, parameters, and limitations of any AI system they deploy. Second, testing isn't optional. Workday's discrimination issues could have been prevented with simple testing of 100 resumes before going live. And third, the rush to be first mentality is creating ethical disasters. Slow down, test thoroughly, and prioritize human impact over market timing. David S. Cohen brings decades of expertise in ethical hiring practices through his books Selecting the Best and The Talent Edge, plus his work with D.S. Cohen and Associates. What hit me hardest was David's California gold rush analogy. Everyone's trampling over each other to get to AI gold, but by the time they arrive, there might be nothing left because they used the tools wrong. The real gold is in responsible, ethical implementation that enhances human decision-making rather than replacing human judgment. The education requirement can't be ignored. David insists that HR practitioners must understand AI algorithms well enough to explain them, just like teachers who come to class unprepared quickly lose control of their classroom. If you don't understand the tool, don't use it on human lives. If this episode made you realize you need to audit your AI implementations for ethical compliance and transparency, share it with every HR leader who's rushing to deploy AI tools. Drop a comment and tell us, what's one AI ethics question you're grappling with in your organization? Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on the Future of Work with AI.